The ouster of Vinay Prasad after 3 months running FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research could signal a reset is ahead for CBER. What does the latest shakeup at the regulatory agency say about what's next for FDA? Also on the BioCentury This Week podcast, we take a look at 2 leading European pharmas, Novo Nordisk, which named a new CEO last week, and Bayer, which is gearing up for launches and revamping its pipeline to restart growth. Plus, mass biologics, can they uncover new value by dialing down tox? I'm Jeff Cranmer, and joining me today on the BioCentury podcast are my colleagues
Simone Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief.
Steve Uston, Washington Editor.
Stephen Hansen, Director of Biopharma Intelligence.
And Selena Koch, Executive Editor.
All right, guys, thanks for joining me on this Monday. Well, Vinay Prasad's fall from grace was astonishingly fast and just flat out astonishing. He rose to great heights quite quickly, only to plummet. And Steve, you likened him to Icarus. Why is that?
Basically, the image is that he had to navigate between 2 forces, right? The sea of Maha and the sun of Trump's infatuation with right to try. You know, that Trump has been interested in since his first administration. Trump has numerous times said that the right to try legislation that was passed in his first administration has saved thousands of lives. As an aside, there's no evidence it's actually saved anyone's life, but it's something that is important to him. When the attacks on Prasad mentioned right to try, when they basically accused Prasad of denying DMD patients and families the right to Sarepta's gene therapy, Elevidys, that caught Trump's attention. And the point that I make in the story is, well, that it was Trump that pushed Prasad out. Everything in Washington these days is actually comes down to what Trump wants. But in this case, it was particularly stark because the FDA commissioner was extraordinarily fond of Prasad. He, on numerous occasions, called him a genius. He not only gave him control of CBER, but he made him a special position, chief science officer and chief medical officer combined, and put Prasad in charge of that, which really gave him the authority to intervene in just about any medical products decision at FDA. So Macri clearly wanted him there. I'm told that HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. also wanted Prasad there because he felt that Prasad was going to do the things that Kennedy wants when it comes to vaccines. And so it really was Trump who pushed him out. It didn't help Prasad that various people, including Laura Loomer, dug up old podcasts where he said that he hated Trump, that he voted against him, that he liked Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But the point I make in the story is that other people have said similar things to that, including J.D. Vance, the vice president, and they've survived them. So that on its own wasn't really the reason why he was pushed out, I think. So I think it was this sense that he got on the wrong side of patients and right to try.
Hey, Steve, maybe you could connect the dots for people between right to try, which is about investigational therapies, and Sarepta's drug, which is approved, which doesn't seem like it's directly related to right to try. So how do you get from one to the other?
You get from one to the other because a lot of the things that are happening in Washington now are not about nuance and detail. Senator Ron Johnson, he was the champion of the right to try legislation, tweeted or X'd, is that what we call it now, about Prasad being responsible for halting shipments of Sarepta, and he called it a violation of right to try. Rick Santorum, the former senator, also alluded to right to try, and some of the others did. So I think that the 2 things actually did get conflated. You're right. Right to try is about the right to get access to unapproved drugs, to investigational drugs, and that's not what this was about. But I think that in Trump's head and in the way that this was presented to him, it was about that.
You talk about other things possibly getting swept up in this concept of right to try. If you think about things happening in the future, you know, what might you predict? You talked about regulatory flexibility and rare disease drug reviews, for example.
Yeah, so I think if you look at it and you say, well, This was really a seismic event. It was a seismic event for the industry, and it was a really seismic event for FDA. It was a seismic event for Prasad to come in the first place. It is the first example in modern memory of somebody coming in, being parachuted in to run a center who had no previous experience at FDA. George Tidmarsh now, by the way, who's taken over CDER and given acting authority over CBER, is also in that same circumstance. But anyway, if you look at it from FDA's standpoint, people are going to try to make sense of this. What does this mean? What do they have to do to hold on to their jobs? What do they have to do to please leadership? And one of the messages that's going to come to them is try to avoid doing things that are going to create the same kind of backlash, the same kind of furor that Prasad's halting of Elevidus did. And so I think that people at FDA are going to look at this, and they're going to see the comments that Commissioner Macri has made about rare diseases and about wanting more flexibility and wanting to create a new pathway for rare diseases. And they're going to look at this and they're going to say, look, if something's on the bubble, if something's on the edge, and you have to decide between approving and not approving, and you realize that not approving could trigger the same kind of commentary on social media from patient advocates, from conservatives who support a kind of libertarian approach to drug regulation, I think that FDA officials are going to be inclined to try to do whatever it is they can to approve those kinds of drugs.
So, Steve, I just want to channel a couple of things from some of my conversations with biotech executives this week. One is, based on things like CRL letters that some people have gotten and things, there's a perception that there's very junior people in FDA writing these, that there's not a lot of internal oversight. And their concern is twofold. One is that there isn't internal oversight by experienced people. And as you say, nobody's going to want to stick their neck out. There have been situations recently where under Prasad, there's been responses given that go against what the FDA had said, either because of the way they analyzed it or whatever agreement that they'd had in earlier meetings with FDA. That guidance had gone away. What FDA in the prior, the last few months before that or last year before that had said. So those executives now don't know who the head of CBER will be now, and whether this next era will honor the way that things have been put up under Prasad. So basically what I'm saying is there's a huge amount of uncertainty over the consistency of FDA's responses, along with this change in leadership.
Yeah, the uncertainty could grow.
It's absolutely true.
The 3 complete response letters at CBER that fit this pattern, Replimune in July, also Ultragenyx in July. Oh, they're all in July. Capricor was the other one. That was another DMD program. Steve?
Look, yes, there's going to be a great deal more uncertainty now. 2 reasons. One is there's the uncertainty about political intervention. It's pretty clear now that individual FDA regulatory decisions can be influenced by political considerations in a clear way. So that creates a lot of uncertainty. And then there's uncertainty around the management of the 2 centers, around CBER and CDER. You've got George Tidmarsh now who's come in. He's running CDER. The early conversations that I've had with people at FDA suggest that he doesn't have a great deal of nuanced understanding of FDA regulation, of the way that things have been done, the way that what's possible and what's not possible. And now he's also in charge of CBER. A lot of the experienced staff at both centers, and especially at CBER, have walked out the door in the last couple of months. And so, yes, there's a great deal of uncertainty. The other thing that I've heard that's interesting is that there's pressure now from the Office of the Commissioner to avoid missing PDUFA deadlines. They're not going to necessarily meet all of their PDUFA deadlines, but they're going to try to do that. What that suggests is 2 things. One is that we're going to be seeing more complete response letters because that allows them to reset the clock on the PDUFA deadline. And I think that's what happened with Ultragenyx. And the other thing that I've heard is that they're going to prioritize PDUFA reviews over other activities, including reviews of INDs. And so that process may be slowed down or become less predictable
What's the impact of that? I mean, isn't the rule that if you don't hear from FDA within a certain amount of time, then you can start your trial?
It is, but what FDA can do is they can get back to you with questions. They can find ways to kick that can down the road and slow that down. That's not as transparent as missing PDUFA goals, but of course, in the long run, it could actually be more problematic.
Talking about making a situation that executives complain about a lot already worse. I mean, the length of time it takes to start trials is something we hear about all the time and seems to be getting faster in places outside the United States.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, we've written a lot about that. And to Steve's point about a lack of senior leadership, really just from following your coverage, Steve, I think we're down to Rich Pazder as being the only seasoned leader left at the agency.
In drugs and biologics, CRH, I think, has been less affected by the departures at the top.
Yeah, and I don't know what's happening on the food side of things, but I'll just say, keep your hands off my Lucky Charms. Does anyone still play Kick the Can, Steve? I know you like that metaphor. That was quite a fun game. All right, let's go to a quick break, then we're going to come back and talk Bayer and Novo.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe. Grand Rounds, BioCentury's R&D conference, will make its European debut in 2025. Join us to debate key translational bottlenecks and unlock scientific breakthroughs with commercial potential. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore cutting-edge advancements in early-stage R&D as we dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Join us for the inaugural BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe in Cambridge, UK, the September 17th to 19th. Register and learn more at biocenturygrandroundseurope.com.
Okay, Grand Rounds Europe. It's in Cambridge, UK, the motherland, as Simone likes to think. We have a great roster of presenting companies, sold out. We're almost sold out of our poster sessions. We have some spots remaining for delegates, so advanced pricing, take advantage of it. It ends in 2 weeks, August 15th. And partnering is getting ready to open August 25th. Simone, any little pitch for this conference?
Well, we do have something new that we've actually just announced, which is on the opening night, we had previously noted that we are going to have a keynote talk from Professor Steve Jackson. This is going to be in the Union Society at Cambridge, but taking advantage of the venue, we are actually going to have a debate. That is actually the Debating Society of Cambridge. And we have two great people in the debate. Steve Bates will represent the UK, and Jerome Van Beverlier is going to, as we say, bring him back down to earth. They will discuss whether this is UK biotech's moment. Can it really capture some global leadership as it hopes to do? But I just think, in fact, what I would really say is this is the time to sign up. We have actually sold out of presenting company places. I think we are virtually sold out of posters, if I'm not wrong. And so you really want to come as a delegate before that sells out as well, because we've got just a great lineup of people coming, and it's a very nice kind of vibey event. You will meet Selena there, and Stephen Hansen there, and me, and Karen Tkach-Stussman, or KTT as we call her, and Josh Berlin. So you meet the BioCentury crowd. Definitely think that is worth signing up for before the price hike on the 15th of August. And one more thing, dollar's really low right now, so I think you get a little bit of an advantage if you do it before things turn around.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to see Jerome go toe-to-toe with Steve. Maybe not quite Ali Foreman or Ali Frazier, but we could probably give it some kind of cool name like the Cut Up in Cambridge, or I don't know. We'll work on that. We'll workshop that a bit.
Maybe it's more like, Winston Churchill against Lady Asquith or something like that. They had a few nice run-ins, although not necessarily in the house.
Showing that deep knowledge of history, as always, Simone. I like that. Well, hey, also don't sleep on the China Healthcare Summit. That is coming up in October. ChinaHealthcareSummit.com. Still some presenting company slots. Great opportunity to get to know what's happening in China. There seems to be a deal a day happening. And as Selena said at the top of the pod, It's a place where you can really run some trials quickly. All right, Stephen, welcome back from your lovely vacation.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Well, the world's second largest obesity company greeted its new insider CEO, Mike Ouster, with a guidance cut that led to a loss of nearly $70 billion in market value. That's a very warm welcome. Stephen, sounds like he has his work cut out for him.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Jeff, and I think that just kind of points to the challenge that he's facing here as he starts off. Just to start off, the one thing that I found quite maybe interesting about this is that he and the sort of outgoing CEO Lars Jorgensen, they just had very similar backgrounds. So they both started off in finance, or low down on the totem pole at Novo Nordisk, experience around IT, corporate development, operations. So they both followed a very similar sort of flow up the organizational chart. So I found that quite interesting. And I think as we pointed out in our story, neither of them really with any R&D or sort of scientific background chops. It was really from the corporate development commercial side of the business. So if you judge, Lars's success while he was there and able to do that without the R&D chops, then I don't see any reason why Ouster shouldn't also be able to deliver on success for Novo as well. But they are very much facing a very pivotal moment, I think, in the company, in the sense that they really have been overtaken by Lilly when it comes to the cardiometabolic leadership space. I would say Lilly is now looked at as the premier sort of obesity company. And, Novo is at a position where what they thought was going to be their leading program, the amylin GLP-1 combination, that was going to be their kind of leg up against the competition. That's very much looking like that's up in the air as to whether that's really going to be a commercially competitive product. So
that's my last question. How much of Novo falling behind here is because of the science and the medicine, and how much of it is due to the marketing and commercial savvy that Lilly has deployed here?
I think it's probably got to be both. It's probably got to be part of the answer because, so obviously Lilly has taken a step ahead because they came out, rather than pursuing a sort of Me Too GLP-1 monotherapy target, they immediately went after a combo in a single product with tirzepatide, which gets GIP and GLP-1. Novo had dual and triple agonists, but they decided that they wanted to go with the amylin combination instead, which, based on phase 1 data, that was probably a good decision. Amylin is still a very hot target, but there are questions now based on the phase 3 data that they've reported, as to whether it's going to be commercially competitive. There are questions about the device, and because it's two separate compounds that you have to administer, so there's questions about how easy it is to manufacture the device. So there's a lot of stuff up in the air now, and so I think it'll be interesting to see how he makes decisions about where to move forward with the company. And what was sort of tucked in below this announcement about the CEO was also the announcement that Marcus Schindler, who had taken over for Mads Thompson as CSO in 2021, that he's also stepping aside and he's retiring. So now you have Martin Holst Lang, who had sort of taken over as VP of Development when Mads has stepped down. Basically, he's now stepping into that CSO role. So I think there's a lot of pressure given the fact that neither, the incumbent CEO or the outgoing one had a lot of scientific background with them. If they put a lot of those decisions on what to move forward with, were resting on those heads of development, heads of R&D. So I think Martin Lang is going to have a big role to play here in terms of bringing Novo back to that leadership position.
What does it have coming behind the amylin combo?
So the biggest opportunity they have is also in the amylin category, but unlike CagriSema, which, as I said, is two different molecules that you're basically dosing together, they have amycretin, which is it's a unimolecular molecule. So it targets both amylin and GLP-1, but in a single molecule. So it's much easier to deliver. It can be formulated in a single injection, and so far has shown better efficacy than what you saw with CagriSema separately. So potentially is a stronger, more potent molecule than what you get with cagrilintide and semaglutide dosed together. That really seems to be, I think that's the molecule that they're looking for. And they're definitely pushing that, I think, as fast as they can, because I think they kind of see CagriSema as not potentially going to have the commercial product profile that they were hoping for.
The amycretin, competitive with Zepbound, but maybe even more importantly, is it competitive with whatever's coming next for Lilly? Is that bad?
I think it will be. I think so because, well, what's coming next for Lilly is the oral GLP-1. And I think that's the big open question for Lilly is how well oral GLP-1s, small molecule oral GLP-1s will do. I think there's a lot of debate around where they fit in the treatment paradigm, how important they'll be. Some people think they're going to be like the small molecules that came in diabetes, where they were taken up as first-line therapy. They were the first thing that people would get. And then when you fail that, you move on to an injectable. Others think that the tolerability is going to be such that they're going to be pushed down just to people who don't want an injection. So there's all these questions around kind of where they're going to fit. Obviously, Lilly tipped their hand a bit in terms of, I think they've been building $500 million, $1 billion worth of volume in preparation for a launch. So I think they expect pretty big demand. We still have to see the phase 3 data. That's still to come for obesity. We've seen the diabetes data, which was fine. It was good. It looks like it's an approvable drug. But yeah, I think that's the next big question for Lilly will be where that fits. And that's separate, I think, from where we would see amycretin. Because the retatrutide, which is their triple agonist for Lilly, I think that's really only for a more niche portion of the population because that's where you need massive weight loss. And I don't think that that's going to be something that's going to be used broadly across an obese population.
All right, let's turn to Bayer. Or is it Bayer, Stephen? We'll let you weigh in on that in a second. But I can tell you that two of its big drugs, Xarelto, revenue fading a bit. Elia, you can correct me as always. Revenue's flattening a bit. Your story, headline, Bayer's bridge back to growth. How are they going to do it, Stephen?
Sure, yeah. So I would say Bayer is, I guess, the way that I pronounce it. I think it's the way that they would pronounce it in German, Bayer. But nevertheless, they're a bit of a complicated one just because, if you look at their stock chart, it's down a lot. But a lot of that is with regard to it's not just a pharma company, right? They have a crop science business. They have some other businesses. And so that kind of complicates the picture a little bit. So we tried to kind of isolate sort of the pharma part of the business and just look at that. And as you mentioned, so Xarelto has gone off patent, one of the big anticoagulant drugs. That revenue, being a small molecule, is likely going to fade pretty fast. So they're already expecting another €1 billion to fall off the top line in the second half of the year. So I think Xarelto is going to fade very quickly. Eylea is a slightly different story. Again, they have sort of the ex-US rights from Regeneron for that. Eylea is also going off patent, but they have the high-dose version, the 8 milligram formulation that's just now sort of launching as a sort of life cycle management play. The initial print from Regeneron looks like there's pretty good take up for the high dose. So there's some potential for the Eylea sort of sales to be a little bit longer lasting and stronger. But in any case, the point is that Bayer, like a lot of other pharma companies, they're facing a patent cliff, and they have to figure out a way to try and bridge that gap. They've done a decent job in the sense that they have two early launch drugs, Nubeqa, which is for prostate cancer, and Kerendia, which is for CKD and not for heart failure, which are both launching really well, both showing pretty strong growth. Nubeqa looks like it's on pace for over €2 billion in sales this year, which is $1 billion more than they had projected as being peak sales just a couple of years ago. That's doing very well. But the problem I found when you analyze what they've got is that's really all they have for near-term growth prospects. So you have Nubeqa and Kerendia doing very well, but then like the third highest growth product in the first quarter of 25 was an aspirin formulation. So that to me was, I guess, a little bit of a red flag that
it was those aspirin commercials as a kid that got me saying Bayer, so it's not all.
That's true. That is true.
Well, how's the earlier pipeline looking? Any sense of the direction they're trying to go now?
Yeah, so in my conversation with head of global product strategy and commercialization, Christine Roth, she had noted that they had really done quite a lot to try and clean up their pipeline, especially the early stage pipeline. So if you look at them now, it's a lot of like new targets. It's very heavy phase 1. So it's very heavy to the early stage, which again, it looks like a lot of interesting assets. They have a lot of there's cell therapy, there's gene therapy, there's radioligands. There's a lot of stuff that, could potentially be meaningful, but nothing that's going to be meaningful in the next 2 to 3 years, right? I mean, that's where they have the gap is sort of in phase 2 and phase 3. So I think they had 4 NMEs in phase 3, 4 NMEs in phase 2, and there are question marks around some of those phase 3 programs like asundexian, which is a factor 11A inhibitor. Really high, expectations for this. Everyone thought this was basically going to be the follow-on to the factor 10 class, but without the bleeding issues. So there were some really high hopes for this, but several in this class failed in phase 2. Companies decided to, in both cases, to push them forward and move them to phase 3. And then Bayer's program failed in the larger patient opportunity in phase 3 in the oceanic atrial fibrillation study. So I think there are real questions around whether or not that's going to become anything commercially. I mean, they're waiting for a readout in secondary stroke prevention this year, but I think there are big questions around whether that's going to become anything that contributes to the top line at all. So that's why I would say, if there are expectations around sort of Bayer making some moves and doing some deals, I would look in that sort of later phase 3, phase 2 sort of area where it looks like they could use a bit more in terms of near-term growth prospects that could help to drive some of that return to growth.
So look out for some bolt-on deals, perhaps. That's a good tip, Stephen, especially since I'm writing the deals report today. Hopefully they get something done, so I have something interesting to talk about, but I guess it only gives them about 8 hours. Let's turn to the clinic. An emerging wave of conditionally activated biologics is widening the therapeutic windows of validated tumor and checkpoint targets. Mass Biologics. Our newest member of the editorial team, Tierney Baum, wrote this piece. Selena, you were the editor. What did you learn?
Yeah. Well, maybe let's start with the idea behind a mass biologic, just to set the stage here. It's a very simple idea. You want to put a molecular mask over the active part of a biologic so that as it circulates through healthy tissue, it remains inert. You want to connect that mask with a linker that responds to something that's specific to the tumor so that you get activation only where you need it, therefore less toxicity. So oncology has always had this problem of a limited number of targets that are only expressed by the tumor and not in healthy tissues, or have a differential expression that's big enough to avoid that off-tumor toxicity. And I think, the first wave of mass biologics fell short. They either didn't unmask efficiently enough, so therefore they didn't have enough efficacy, or they unmasked too early, leading to tox, so they weren't actually able to do the thing they were meant to do, avoid the tox. There's also been some struggles with manufacturing complexity, stability, so on and so forth. I think, one of the lessons that's been learned is that you have to have your unmasking, to have it be effective, you have to address some variability that maybe wasn't initially appreciated. Because from tumor to tumor, and often from patient to patient in the same indication, there's a lot of variability in the expression profile of proteases in the tumor microenvironment. So why does that matter? That matters because the main strategy for cleaving a linker and unmasking one of these biologics is to use tumor-expressed proteases to do that cleaving. So I guess in the story, Tierney gave an example of one company called Werewolf Therapeutics, whose platform is designed to get around some of that interpatient variability in protease profile by screening linkers like on a wide range of tissue samples from patients, looking for linkers that can be cleaved by many classes of proteases, but then threading the needle by counter-screening them in healthy tissue to make sure that even though they can be cleaved by many types of proteases, it's still a tumor-specific thing you're seeing there. And then those become a little bit more robust in terms of their unmasking. So that's just one approach, but there are many companies getting in this. They are masking all the major classes of biologics, from mAbs to ADCs to bispecifics to cytokines. And as you mentioned at the start, Jeff, they're doing it with validated targets, or well understood targets, because you don't want to, load up both the technology risk and the biology risk.
Do we have any clinical data yet showing, I presume part of the idea here is that by masking, you're able to put less drug in, so you can go with a lower dose?
Or you can push the dose higher, because if it doesn't have any off-tumor activity, you can really, if it works to sequester it in the tumor, then you could push the dose higher there. We're starting to see, with this latest wave of biologics, some data in the clinic. At least 3 companies are looking at microsatellite stable colorectal cancer with a masked CTLA-4 combo with a PD-1. Those are well understood targets, drug classes, right? The tox you get and the efficacy you get from combining those mechanisms have been tested many, many times. But here they're using a masking on the CTLA4 to try and make that mechanism only active in the tumor so you can get better efficacy. We have at least 3 companies, I think, reported phase 2 data this year. Adagene, Celio, and a company called Agenus, if I'm pronouncing that right. And the kind of early responses there are looking promising. And then the other place where we're seeing clinical data from a little, set of companies is in metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer with bispecific PSMA CD3, so a T-cell engager. And there we've got Vir and Janux leading, and there's a good comp to unmasked bispecific T-cell engagers against those same 2 targets from J&J and Harpoon have both published data on that. And so far what we've seen is looking at a decrease of at least 50% in antigen expression. Both the J&J and Harpoon unmasked versions had percentage decreases of like 5 to 6%, whereas Janux and Vir were both over 50% reduction. I think there's small numbers of patients. I think the Janux one was only 14, but I think all 14 saw at least 50% decline in antigen expression. So that's a very big difference with no jump in AEs.
And CytomX was one of the real early players in this space. Is that right?
It was one of the early players in the space, yeah. And I think it had some mixed results early on. But
that was my first recollection, was CytomX doing a CTLA4, a mass CTLA4. I think they did a deal with BMS because BMS was trying to do basically a masked IPI type of approach. But
exactly. Yeah, I think that the field of like clever linker strategies is really the thing that's changing right now and kind of unlocking things. Hopefully, we'll see if the clinical data still play out. But CytomX is one of the companies that produced some exciting data this year. I don't know if you remember the EpCAM data. Mm-hmm. So that's a target that really hadn't taken off. It was too toxic. It had to be given by like interperitoneal injection in the first drug that was approved, which is an odd route. Mm-hmm. And it's shown with its masked, I believe it was an ADC in that case, that maybe that target is going to become more tractable.
Yeah, and it was CytomX. Just from looking at what Tierney wrote, I know she spoke with the CEO Sean McCarthy, and he talked a little bit about going after a PD-L1 antibody first, and how that didn't work out, and they moved away from the checkpoint inhibitors. But he said, sort of classic biotech stories, like we wouldn't be where we are now if we hadn't done what we did first. So always good to see, the stocks rise and fall, and it's great when companies hang around long enough to kind of figure out a path.
That's what I was going to say. You can just, have enough funds to like keep trying and keep learning. Yeah.
It's good to see. So great story by Tierney. I'll drop a link in the show notes. Steven, Steve, Simone, Selena, appreciate all your insights today. And thanks for tuning in. If you can, leave us a review, drop us a comment. Love hearing from you. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to maybe talk about it on the next pod. And special thanks to Kendall Square Orchestra, which provides the music for BioCentury's 2 podcasts.